Hello, welcome to our 18th weekly video regarding our Through My Bible in 1 Year series here at St. John's. So you added another book of the Bible this past week as you started going through 1st Chronicles, as well as continuing through 1st Samuel and also the book of Acts. In regard to your Old Testament readings in 1st Samuel, I'd ask you to think about the fact that God knows all things, and yet God became grieved that he had made Saul king. And why God would go through with that, knowing Saul was going to fall away, why would he make Saul king in the first place? Well, first of all, as we'll see several times, many times in the Bible, and actually in our own lives as well, we always want to keep a distinction between what God knows is going to happen and what God wants to happen. God wants all people to be saved. God knows not all people are going to be saved. God knows the sins that you are going to commit today, but we certainly know that God doesn't want you to commit those sins. We do have free will. And we have free will because God knows that he is glorified when we make the decision as his people to obey him and serve him freely rather than under compulsion. Saul was a child of God. Saul was one of God's people. Saul was anointed king, and he had every opportunity to serve God. He chose not to. It was God's will that he chose to. Yet, even in knowing what Saul would do, God gave him the opportunity, as he gives opportunities to us too. And then in looking at the readings from the book of Acts, especially those middle sections that you read through chapter 12, I asked you to note the transition between Peter, kind of as the central figure of the book of Acts, and the Apostle Paul, or Saul, as the central figure. And there's really a reason for that. The transition really mirrors the transition of the Christian church from a group of almost exclusively Jewish people who had come to know Jesus to a group that is primarily Gentile in our day and age. And as Peter was the chief apostle to the Jews, Paul was the chief apostle to the Gentiles. So in that transition, we're naturally going to move from looking more at Peter to looking more at the work of the Apostle Paul. Also, the man who wrote by the inspiration of the Spirit, the book of Acts, the evangelist Luke, traveled with Paul and had an intimate knowledge of Paul's story too. So it's just natural that as Paul begins his work and Luke is there with him, Luke is going to have many things to say about the Apostle Paul. Now, moving on this week, you're going to go through 1 Samuel 18 through 25. And you've probably noticed in these first 18 weeks, we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about the Psalms. They're almost a throw-in to our regular Bible readings, as we certainly do want to get through the book of Psalms. It's kind of negligent on my part not to talk more about the Psalms. Martin Luther talked about the Psalms as the Bible within a Bible. Next year, after we finish this 1 year Through My Bible series, we will do something similar to what we're doing now, only we will focus exclusively on the book of Psalms. This week is actually an opportunity to really dive into some of the Psalms too, because the Psalms that are picked out for you to read will parallel very closely the narrative in 1 Samuel 18 through 25. So note the connections between the incidents that you read about and the Psalms that reflect David's mindset as he is enduring some of these things. And then as you go on looking at the work of the Apostle Paul in his first few missionary trips, you'll want to note too how the Apostle Paul goes about doing his mission work. And I'd ask if you can summarize Paul's methodology of evangelism in just a few short sentences. God's blessings on your readings this week. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.